Boker Tov, everybody. Welcome. As we have, so I guess, our ongoing series of Yemei Iyun before all the Yamim Tovim. And Rachel spoke before our Purim Yom Iyun. We had our Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah, even December 25th, we had a Yom Iyun, and a pleasure to see everybody. I want to thank our sponsors of today's program, our good friends of Torah Motion, Sharon and Rabbi Rafael Omen, who are sponsoring today's learning in memory of their son, Rav Shmuel Eliyahu, Sharon's parents, Rabbi Leonard and Jean Pearl, Sharon's grandfather, Dr. Ben-Sion Pearl, Rabbi Ben-Sion Pearl, Sharon's great-grandfather, Chaim Brenner, and Sharon's brother, Dr. David Pearl. The Shamat should have aliyot, and we should have come together for a happy occasion and smachot, and want to thank you for your help and sponsorship. And Rachel, always a pleasure to be back. And Vakasha, she teaches Tanach, right? So all kinds of interesting things, and we'll get started. Mountains. Why was the Torah given a mountain? Looking at mountains in the Torah. Vakasha.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kalman. Thank you, everybody. And let us delve right in. When we talk about the revelation of God and Matan Torah, and we talk about it being on Mount Sinai often gets relegated to the role of being a setting. And sometimes not just a setting, sometimes it's part of the pyrotechnics of Matan Torah, right? The mountain is on fire, the mountain blooms, very different phenomena, and yet somehow they both play a role in our understanding of Matan Torah. And I want to take this setting, this prop, almost Mount Sinai, and drag it for a moment into the limelight. Because I think that when we look at it, or more specifically, when we contextualize it, and try and ask more generally, what roles do mountains play in Tanach? And we see that there are certain categories of roles that they play. We are better placed to then understand more fully the significance, the metaphorical significance, the symbolic significance of Mount Sinai, and what the mountain itself brings into the story. How it's not just a technical setting, but rather it also enhances some of the messages, some of the nuances of what Matan Torah on Har Sinai is all. So in order to do that, I want to start not by zooming in on Mount Sinai, but rather by zooming out on mountains and Tanakh in general. And I want to start with the first time mountains are mentioned. The first time mountains are mentioned at all in Tanakh is in the context of the story of the Mabul. And they're very much described as places of refuge. Now, it's a place of refuge that failed in the case of the Mabul, but it's a place of refuge. Let's look at it very briefly, just so we see the wording. I'm here in the source sheet. The waters in Genesis 7, verse 18, in the first box in the source sheet. The waters swelled and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark drifted upon the waters. When the waters had swelled much more upon the earth, all the highest mountains everywhere under the sky were covered. This little detail, it's a tiny, tiny detail in the big scheme of things, but in all truth, it, I believe, invites us to alter our understanding of the flood, of the Mabul in general, because we're so used to the story of the flood, it's so removed from us, it's so succinct, that it sort of hides all the horror. We read it as if it's, oh, look at the story, Noah collects all the animals, oh, how nice, male, female, etc., etc. And it's easy to forget that all of humanity perished, that most of animals perished. Now, that little detail somehow makes room in the story, in this very abbreviated, glossing over kind of narrative, for the horror, because it gives us a sense of duration and of process. It means for us, in a sense, that it wasn't just, boom, God did a quick thing and everybody died. No, there was a process. First, the low places were covered. Presumably, people ran to the high places. Then the high places started being covered, and so on and so forth until there was nowhere to go. Beyond the fact that it's interesting that the story does make room, albeit in this careful and implicit way, for the horror of the Mabul, it also establishes for us that the first role of mountains, or the first service mountains can offer for humanity, is as high places they can run to, places of refuge from disaster, from death. And the truth is that mountains continue to play this role in several key moments. If you look at the source sheets one more, you will see one of those places, just a moment, in the third source in the first box. It's in the context of the war of the 4 and 5 kings in Genesis. Now the valley of Shittim was dotted with bitumen pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their flight threw themselves into them, while the rest escaped to the hill country. Now in Hebrew, it doesn't say hill country, it says Hera, to the mountain. Except that Rashi highlights that if it was the mountain, it would have been to the mountain, as if there is a particular place that is a mountain of refuge. Hera, instead of Hahara, really should be translated as to a mountain. Because, as Rashi highlights here, it doesn't matter what mountain it is. You just need a mountain to find safety. Another time when mountains play this particular role of offering refuge is later in the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where the angels tell Lot, run away to the mountain. Now, there the story is a little bit inverted because Lot doesn't want that safety. Lot is begging for a different form of safety. He says, I can't do it. I can't make it to the mountain. I would rather if you, dear angels and dear representatives of God, allowed me to go to this city, Tzoar, at the end of the plain that was supposed to be destroyed with the rest of them, and please save it on my behalf, and I will stay there. I can't handle the mountain. It's when you read the pshat, when you just read the words, it sounds as if what he's saying is, I'm too tired. I can't do it. I can't breathe. I lost, stamina. I've been escaping all night. I can't make it all the way there. That would be a little odd, frankly, because here they are telling him God wants to save you. In fact, they miraculously saved him from the rapists in Sodom. Why can't they help him make it to the mountain? So the Midrash and Rashi following the Midrash say, no, they're not talking about a literal mountain here. Really, they're talking about Abraham. Abraham is likened to a mountain. If we have time, we'll talk about that later. And what Lot is, and beyond the metaphor of Abraham being called a mountain, Abraham lives in the mountain land, in the mountain range of Israel. So for Lot to go to the mountain is putting himself into Abraham's sphere, the place where Abraham is dominant. And then the question arises, why? Why doesn't he want to go back to Abraham? Why doesn't he want to go for refuge to a place where he will be safe and loved and taken care of? So many people know in Israel, when we were looking for a place of refuge in the first days after October 7th, fleeing from both north and south, at first went to their families. Later, there are hotels organized and tent cities and all kinds of solutions. But the first place you go to is your family. And yet Abraham doesn't want to go. Let us put a pin in this question. We will come back to it in a short while. But first, I want to talk about the category of mountains as places of refuge and point out that while this role that mountains play, or this service that they offer to mankind, is clearly something desirable in all these stories and others, which I didn't mention, but there are many, there's also a danger attached to it. Because what happens when people get used to a place of safety, a place where they feel confident, either because a disaster, the flood, the fire is below them, or because the people who want to harm them are below them, and they're at the top and they have better visibility. What happens to people who get used to it is that they can't leave that place of safety. Think about the way we find ourselves stuck in our comfort zones at times. And the way once we get used to a certain way of life, it's very hard for us to break free from it, especially when we prosper, when we feel secure. Yet at times you have to. At times you have to outgrow your comfort zone. At times you have to break the stalemate. At times you have to engage in battle, be it a physical, real, literal battle or something else. And in those times, those places of safety and security can become an inhibiting force for people, stopping them from doing what they have to do. The most striking example of this, I think, in Tanach, is the crazy moment when the Philistine army is on one mountain, on one side of the valley of Elah, and our army under the leadership of Shaul, King Shaul, is on another mountain on the other side of the valley of Elah. And we want to fight so as to push the Philistines away from the mountain land, the mountain range of Israel, and towards the beach. And they want to fight to push us into the mountains and encroach back into the mountain and take control over our area. Yet no one is willing to lose the height advantage and engage in actual battle, because as long as the Philistine army is on the heights and we're in the heights, we're safe and they're safe. To go down is to expose yourself to an attack from above, and both armies are scared to break this stalemate. Goliath steps into the breach and suggests a battle of champions. For 40 days, he curses the God of Israel, and the Israelites are so wary of him, but more generally of risking themselves by coming off their mountain, that they don't do anything to defend themselves, their honor, God's name, leading to a deep humiliation for the Jewish people and a deep delay in the war, which in agricultural times had devastating consequences, because all these men fighting there or not fighting, sitting on a mountain, are the same men who are needed to harvest the wheat in the fields. And into this stalemate steps David, the man who is never scared of risking himself, of putting himself in danger. He gives an impassionate speech about how he's there with God's help and therefore he can do it. And he leads the people to victory and steps onto history's stage. Moving though this moment is, I want to take a step back and once again talk about mountains more generally. We see that mountains can be a place of refuge. We see that sometimes this place of security, of extreme safety, can become a danger for the people's eventual success by inhibiting them, by making them so used to safety that they're scared to risk themselves, that they're scared to put skin in the game. And I want you to remember that. I want you to put a pin in this as well, in this worry, ingrained worry that a state of comfort can make people complacent or scared or in other ways unwilling to act when action is necessary. Because we will come back to how this particular fear plays a role in Mount Sinai after we talk about yet another category that mountains, or role that mountains play in the stories of Tanach, and then we will bring both roles together into Sinai. The other role that mountains play repeatedly in the stories of Tanakh is tied to the act of seeing. And here I should say that there's a dual role, because mountains are both something that is seen very easily, right? We see them from far, they stand out, they break the line of the horizon. Think of Abraham taking Isaac to be bound and sacrificed and seeing Mount Moriah. Think about a nation of slaves who grew up in a land of the Nile and the land of the plains. And suddenly God they don't remember so well talks to them through Moshe and tells them, you must come with me. And he brings them to a mountain. And suddenly they see this enormous thing that they've never seen before, jutting into the sky, almost as if pointing them upwards towards God, towards the idea that some things are bigger than others. And think also of the fact that the opposite is true. Not only are mountains places that stand out and we can see them easily, mountains are also places from which we can see easily. Mountains serve as places that allow us to extend our sight farther. And I want to look together, pun unintended, forgive me, at a particular instance where a mountain plays a role in allowing someone to look. And it is in a particularly poignant moment, the moment that closes Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the last chapter of Sefer Dvarim, when Moshe Rabbeinu, after talking about it several times, we see the instruction to go up the mountain and see the land of Israel before his death and several other places. But the last chapter of the Torah is a place where Moshe actually does it. goes up to Mount Nebo, looks at the land of Israel, the land he cannot reach, and dies. And I want to zoom into this moment for a little bit. Here, just a moment. I'm skipping ahead to box 3. Moshe went up from the steppes of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the summit of Pisgah, opposite Jericho. And Hashem showed him the whole land, Gilad as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the whole land of Judah, etc., etc. I'm skipping to verse 4. And Hashem said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will assign it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross there. In Hebrew, it's more succinct. V'shama lo ta'avo. And these are the last words spoken in the Torah. After that, we hear of Moshe's death. So Moshe, the servant of God, died there in the land of Moab at the command of God. Al pi Hashem. If we had plenty of time, I would have asked you right now, why do you think God bothers showing the land to Moshe? Because after all, God could have said, sorry, no, you can't see it. You can't. Why go through this complicated song and dance? Why make Moshe look and yearn when there's no hope ever of fulfillment, of allowing him to go where he sees and touch it with his own hands and live it with his own hands? And the truth is that the Parshanim, both traditional and modern, both within the Jewish fold and not in the Jewish fold, have been busy and spilled seas of ink on this question because it's such a poignant and difficult moment when Moshe, the Moshe Rabbeinu, the one who did everything God told him, the one who took us out of Egypt and gave us the Torah and protected us even from God himself when God was angry with us and led us through the desert, is watching and can't cross. It's a painful moment. Yet many Parshanim say that the reason here, it's not to torment Moshe, it's not to show him and flaunt to him, dangle in front of him that which he cannot reach. No, it's an act of love. God loves Moshe. God knows that Moshe can't go. It's the wrong thing for Moshe. It's the wrong thing for the people for various reasons we can't go into right now. But he wants to give him as much as he can. He wants to give him the pleasure of at least seeing it, being comforted by the sight of it. It's perhaps easier to understand this answer when we look at this scene through the prism of the Midrash, a very ancient Midrash from Midrash Tanaim from the time of the Mishnah, that reads this description of everything Moshe sees, not as a description of places, but rather as a description of events. They say that every word in this description hints to future events. When we say Irat Marim, the city of palms, we're hinting to Deborah, who one day would sit under a palm tree and be a shofetet and a prophetess for Israel. When we talk about Dan, really we're hinting at the story of Shimshon, who will one day defend Israel against their enemies until he dies. When we're reading about Menashe, really we're hinting to the story of Gidon, who will one day rise and protect the people from the Midianites and the Amalekites and the Ishmaelites that kept roaming and stealing all their food every summer. In other words, what Moshe is saying is not just the physical land, the land itself, the contours of it, the mountains, the valleys, etc. What he is seeing is the future of Israel. And I would say more than that. What he is seeing is that time and time again in this future, we will forget God, because that is the truth of all those stories that are told in the book of Judges, right? The story of Gidon and Shimshon and Deborah. They all stories of heroism that emerge out of disaster and loss, out of a moment when we forget God, forget the covenant, start straying after other God, after other fake divinities. And as a result, God allows our enemies to overcome us. And yet, Moshe will see that even though we forget the covenant, even though we are punished for it, time and time again, we rise. And the Tanaim from the Mishnah in this Midrash hint that perhaps it even means to our days, to the end of days, that he will see everything there is to see about the history of Israel and see how no matter how many times we falter and fall and forget and sin, we rise and we continue our journey with God. This is especially significant and especially loving of God as something to offer Moshe when we recall that Moshe's great concern at this moment, one that he expresses over and over and over again in Deuteronomy, is the concern that the people will settle in the land, be comfortable, settle into their comfort zone, if you will, going back to our previous theme, and forget about God, forget about the Exodus, forget about the covenant. They will enjoy this prosperity in the land so much that they will forget that this prosperity is a gift from God dependent upon their conduct and their faith and their behavior. And God is concerned about that. And Moshe is concerned about that. And he keeps giving them advice on how to not get to this point. He says, tell the story to your children. Tell the story when you bring the Bikurim, the first fruit on Shavuot, relevant for us right now. Do everything you can not to forget, because if you forget and drop the covenant, you will be exiled and suffer punishments. So there's something very comforting in the idea that before his death, God let Moshe see that, yes, his worst fears will come true, and yet they wouldn't be the end of the Jewish story. The descendants of the people Moshe brought out of Egypt will overcome their forgetfulness and with the help of God, redeem themselves over and over again. However, there's a problem with this interpretation of the fact that Moshe is seeing it as if it's a gift for him out of love for him. As Rabbi E.T.L. Gold from Yeshivat Har Etzion points out in a beautiful article, the Torah doesn't usually spend too many words on something that is just relevant for God's relationship with an individual, past Genesis, I should say. In other words, if something is given real weight in the story, it's usually because it has meaning for us, for the people as a whole, and not just for Moshe Rabbeinu, the man whom God loved and wanted to give something nice to. And the question becomes, how is the act of Moshe seeing, how is this moment when Moshe sees the future or the land or both, is a gift for us as well? And Rabbi Gold points out that it's a gift for us as a people, because when Moshe is facing his death, the people are facing an enormous rupture in their life. They're about to lose Moshe. They're about to lose the manna. They're about to lose the clouds that were their shelter and their guides from God all these 40 years in the desert. They're about to have to change from people who dwell in this God-made tent of clouds to people who fight a dirty war and get their hands dirty and then build something out of this land and lead a productive life on the land of Israel. All kinds of commandments that until now were totally irrelevant, just a matter of theory for them, are about to become practical matters that they have to take care of. And they have to do all of that without the guidance of Moshe. And Moshe is looking at that moment of rupture along with God, and recognizes that moments of rupture have the potential to be such enormous traumas that the people will falter afterwards and not be able to continue, that they wouldn't have the wherewithal to understand what they're supposed to do in this new world. So God and Moshe are establishing all sorts of continuities. They're establishing continuity in leadership. Moshe, in his life, tells the people that Yoshua will be the man to lead them after him. Moshe gives them all these speeches, reminding them of the past and of the future, trying to create a bridge of words across the Jordan River. And here, God is inviting Moshe to create a bridge of sight, a bridge of looking over the Jordan River and between the past, pre-entry into Israel, and the future, post-entry into Israel. In other words, it's not just that Moshe is getting the comfort of seeing that everything will be okay. It's that the people, as they live through these events, have the comfort of knowing that Moshe already foresaw it and everything will be okay. Everything will end up fine. The continuity here runs much deeper than that. We don't have much time to discuss it. I'll just point out one important thing, which is that in another moment when someone stands on a mountain and looks out, it's in Bereshit 13, here in box 2, we are told, a moment, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, to verse 14. Hashem said to Avram after Lot had parted from him, raise your eyes and look out from where you are to the north and south, to the east and west. for I give all the land that you see to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring too can be counted. Up, walk about the land, through its length and breadth, for I give it to you. Moshe, in looking and seeing the land, is closing or bookending a story that opened when Abraham looked at the land. So he creates a continuity with the future, with the people who live through the events he sees now, foresees, I should say, and he creates a continuity with the past, bringing to mind the promise God made to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, a promise God explicitly mentions in Dvarim when he tells them, here is a land that I promised. Now you saw it, now die. Forgive the grim ending here, not mine. In other words, Moshe is becoming a bridge from our very first beginning, the go forth, the Lech Lecha, all the way to the end of days, allowing us as we go through moments of rupture, be it as we cross the Jordan River or live through a year like this year, to re-envision or remember that what we're going through is part of a much longer story and we shouldn't give way to despair. But how does that have anything to do with Mount Sinai? And here I want to bring it all together. Mount Sinai is not just a happy occasion, it's also a terrifying occasion, an awesome occasion in the original meaning, etymological meaning of the word, awe-inspiring, terrifying moment. In the Midrash, it's described as the ultimate moment of rupture, because the Midrash tells us that when the people heard the voice of God, they couldn't contain it and they died. The angels revived them. The angels made a miracle and revived them. It's a way for the Midrash to express that something like encountering God directly is something we can't live through. There's no, and then you go on with your life. There's a forever before and a forever after. It just breaks your life into two different parts. And we need this rupture. And this is where I think the mountains as places of refuge and the danger of those places of refuge and making us afraid to risk ourselves can help us understand why we need this rupture. We need this rupture because if we are to build a wholly new nation based on a wholly new principle, on an entire nation making a contract with God, not some special individual, an entire nation making a covenant with God after hearing his voice, people need to find the courage to seize this moment, to build this kind of life. And the slaves that came out of Egypt can't. Something of them needs to die, a certain attachment to their past, a certain habit of servility, of thinking a little of themselves, of seeing themselves as small, needs to die, needs to be left in the before of this great rupture for them to rise to the occasion. They need to be shaken out of their comfort zone, just as they needed to be shaken out of their comfort zone in Egypt and by the Red Sea and all the way whenever they complain and are afraid. So in that regard, Mount Sinai here plays the opposite role or the inverse of other mountains. Other mountains offer safety. Mount Sinai offers shaking off of safety, opening yourself to the opportunities and risks of a relationship with God and stepping forth. But at the same time, in order to make it something that people can absorb and deal with and live with, Mount Sinai, fulfilling the role of Mount Nebo and the mountain Abraham stood on when they're looking forward, created a sense of continuity for the rest of us, offers us a certain continuity as well. Because while it's the first time the Israelites visit Mount Sinai, it's the second time Moshe visits Mount Sinai. Moshe first visited Mount Sinai when he saw a burning bush and heard God for the first time. And God told him then, you will bring the people here and they will serve me here. So when the people come again to Sinai, while it's something new, while it's a moment of rupture, while it breaks away and helps them shed their old skin, as someone wrote beautifully in the chat, it's also something that was already foretold and something that as soon as they get to it, the first thing God tells them is that I will give you my commandments here and you will pass them to your children, creating a sense of continuity, not only with Moshe's visit in the past and what Moshe foresaw, but also with what still lies in the future and their role that they will have to play after their moment of rupture. And in this way, Mount Sinai brings together both rupture and continuity, both far-seeing and the bridge it creates over time, and the much needed shaking out of comfort zone that all of us need at times. May we be wise enough to seek both in our own lives, and may we hear Besorot Tovot. Thank you very much.